right, welcome back to RoomPack's ResEdChat, the podcast for people who work in and around housing and residence life. We've got a very special episode today. This is episode 100. So we've been doing this 100 times now, and we decided, why don't we get all the current hosts together to kind of do a little bit of a roundtable about our experiences learning through this process from both our guests, but also just the process itself of how do you do a podcast episode. One of the things that we're hoping to do in the coming year is actually expand our team. So if you are interested in potentially being a host here on ResEdChat, just take a look in the show notes. We're going to include a link to the application. We'll be doing that on a rolling basis. So if it's something of interest to you, please reach out. But it feels weird to say, but I'd like to welcome my guests, our guests. Do we have any guests? Does it count as having any guests? I don't even know. I think we're just all hosts. So I'm going to kick us off with my introduction. My name is Paul Brown. I use he, him, his pronouns, and I've been working with RoomPact a little over 8 years at this point. And I've been happy to kind of kickstart this when we first started it as a company, this podcast. And then we kind of pulled in Dustin and Crystal as we went along, who have been fantastic. So I've been stepping away a little bit, but it was kind of a fun thing to start. Pandemic times, there's a global pandemic. Let's start a podcast. I feel like that's not an uncommon story. But why don't I kick it over to Dustin? You do your introduction.
Yeah. I guess we're gonna go again chronologically as we kind of came on board here. But so Dustin Ramsdell, he, him pronouns, and I've been a part of the ResEdChat podcast since it was fall of 2022. I think the first episode that we did to kind of handed off the baton. We recorded October of 2022, so it's been over 2 years of doing these episodes. It's been really great. I've been a fan of RoomPack for a really long time, and I've been a podcaster for pretty much my entire hired career. Is something I did to get myself out there and share some reflections on that. But it's been an honor to kind of help sort of resurrect this show and get it going, because I think it's just such an awesome feel and something different for me that kind of keeps this podcasting game fresh. So really excited to be here as part of episode 100 to reflect. And I know, Crystal, you've been a crucial part of this journey as well, helping to fill out the schedule and kind of add in a different perspective and kind of some different topics to the mix. So I guess talk about, your journey into the show.
Thank you. I am so excited for episode 100. So Crystal Lay, she, her series pronouns. I learned about RoomPact a long time ago at a vendor fair in the region. And so just really loved what the company was about. And so I saw a call for bloggers and I thought, cool, I can do this. I can talk about something random in one page or less. And then after that engagement was up, Paul said, hey, have you thought about podcasting? I do have a broadcast background from my undergrad degree. And so I thought, hey, I can dust that off and really work with and for a company that I believe in and talk about some really cool topics. So excited to be here.
And I didn't know that, right? You had blog press. I didn't know what your undergraduate degree was in. So I was I'm trying to think, who could be good at I bet Crystal would be really good because she's just a good conversationalist. I was thinking more from that angle when I reached out to you of oh yeah, Crystal can talk to anyone and she has such a unique take on things. She's gonna, get unique guests, different topics. So that was totally my train of thought. And then you pop in with, oh yeah, by the way, I was a broadcasting major in my undergrad. I was like, oh, well, even better.
Yeah, I guess that's interesting for me because I know I did radio TV stuff in high school, and so that was the initial muscle memory and sort of comfort with putting myself out there, and so I think I know a lot of people come into it with something like that, maybe they I don't know, did public speaking or something. It's just that comfort with putting yourself out there in that way and talking in a kind of clear and concise and kind of compelling way. And I guess if I recall, I think for you, Paul, maybe what your route is, and I so confirm my understanding, but you'd been out there kind of obviously just out on social, writing a lot, and maybe doing your fair share of webinars and conference presentations and just keynoting and all that. So was that sort of what was able to give you the comfort to put yourself out there into the podcasting format?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've presented at so many conferences, but I also kind of do it independently, like, right, as an independent speaker. And I thought, oh, well, again, it's pandemic times. I'm not doing that. Maybe this is an opportunity to stretch myself in a slightly different way. I can tell you that the skills are transferable, but they are not exactly the same when it comes to doing a live presentation at a conference as opposed to doing it in a recording like this. But you did mention working with radio, and I was a DJ in college. So I don't even know why I didn't think about that. But I think that actually kind of plays into it. So I can, you know, go into a deeper radio voice if I need to.
Yeah, because that's what I think for me is just one. I'll kind of like really crystallize this reflection is that idea of like if you've been putting yourself out there in some way, or like I think it's just the idea of like it can still feel like it brings like a freshness to sharing ideas, having conversations, and all that. But I think it can also be sort of the starting point. Like if you want to start to put yourself out there in a very genuine and authentic way, I think is a great place to start. So it's like we all had very different paths. There's a lot of different ways into this, but I think it ends up in the same place of like the outcome is that you're able to like genuinely distinguish yourself, build a network, and put yourself out there. Whether you've been out there speaking for a long time, I think it can add a freshness to that, or it can be a great starting point where I think it can build the skills that could get you, to that point or whatever. So I think it's honoring that there is a uh, wide berth of kind of just like paths that can lead you to this place, and then take you wherever it goes. And then by the end of the journey, I think everybody kind of ends up in the same place where people know you, know what you care about, know how you can speak about things and all that. So I've been very grateful for the you know over 10 years of experience that I had podcasting to kind of achieve those things.
And it's so accessible too. I think, when I went through my degree program, it was so technical. You want to get every frame, all the different pieces in the right place. And it's so accessible. And like almost anyone can do it, right? Like have the conversation, don't wear bright red on the screen or bright white. There's things you should know. But I like the idea of you could really think about, what am I curious about? What do people want to know? And then I can just sit down and have a conversation with a colleague or a friend and invite people into that space. That's what I think I've enjoyed the most.
Well, and I mean, that's kind of like when you started, Crystal, and you're like, who should I? I'm like, just do what you're going to do. Talk to the people you're like, whatever you're thinking about. You're like, I want to talk to that person. Just go ahead and do your thing, because I knew that you would certainly surface things that I never thought about. Because I feel like that's one of your strengths. But also I just know you're a curious person. So I'm like, okay, we don't need to do anything with Crystal. We're just gonna say, here's how much I'll pay you. Here's what I need out of you. Go. You'll be fine. You'll be fine.
Like I think that is like a really good point, is the idea that like you can come at this like very easily. You can start somewhere, and I think it podcasting allows a sort of like um I don't know, just like the opportunity for growth in the sense of like it doesn't require perfection or sort of like, a really polished presentation. Like I think if the content is there, people will like accept that it's like, yeah, you're not in like a professional studio and doing all these things. It's like if I can hear you and understand, like, and like, because like the content is what's engaging me and keeping me here, keeping me listening, keep coming back for every episode and everything. And that's even just for me. Like I've kind of changed my setup or just sort of my approach over 10 years, and there's certain fundamentals that have been helpful to kind of keep tried and true over the time. But yeah, that's something that I love about it, because I think it is like if you are like speaking up on a stage in front of people, it's like you do need to kind of like be on your game kind of from the get-go for that. But then like it's sort of the like high risk, high reward. Like you do sort of get a lot of credibility and sort of like power by being like up on the stage and commanding that sort of like presence and everything. But yeah, it's always just been like nice for me, just sort of like the authenticity, the warmth, the sort of like come as you are sort of nature of podcasting is really I don't know, something I love about it.
Well, I do plan my warmth. Let me be honest. I will write out my questions in advance. I pick out my outfit. I think one episode I wore this hideous shirt. It was super cute in person, but like on camera, it looked like I was like a Tetris game. Like it was horrible. I was like, why did I do this? But so I do, because I'm an introvert, I put a lot of thought into, I want this to go well. I want my guests to feel really good and prepared. And then if I do that pre-work, then I feel really, really good about when we actually hit record, you know?
And I'm so much more shoot from the hip, right? Like, I think about it. Like I reflect. I might even make some jot down some notes, but usually I'm doing it like right before the episode. Like I kind of know some general pieces, and then I'm like, let's just see where it kind of like randomly goes. I don't know which approach is better, or if there truly is one that's better or not. But you do need to do some form of preparation. I think there's maybe different levels for different people, but I mean, Dustin gets it the most because, you and I are typically picking topics when we host the people we know or that we want to do. Dustin, having kind of been outside higher ed a little bit, kind of works through guests that we brainstorm together. So he might not have that same kind of natural, oh, I know you, or I've just talked about this, because you don't work in residence life day in, day out.
Yeah, I mean, that's been like a treat and a pleasure of this experience. It's kind of like reinvigorated my love for res life, where I started as like an undergrad, as an RA, and grad school. I was a graduate hall director, and my first professional job was in res life. But it's been the better part of a decade that I've like not worked in res life, and then certainly, yeah, like working adjacent to higher education institutions. I think it is that idea of appreciating that, like that wider perspective, or kind of just outsider perspective is appreciated. And it's like, yeah, serve me up like who to talk about a what, and I'll find the time, prep the questions and all that. Like I think because I've just if folks are following along with all these episodes, like I've done the episodes with the blogging cohort. I mean, like we're recording this episode November 2024, before the holiday season craziness and everything, but like so all those are like fresh in my mind, and so many of them were reflecting on like, oh, I applied, but I don't know, like I didn't work in res life, or I had this like different perspective, like the all these sort of reasons that they were sort of like not sure if it would have happened for them, but like intentionally wanting those people to be in the mix and think about this work and think about how to be like good partners to the folks that work in res life. I think that's just been like just part of like the interesting experience is like, yeah, as long as I know who I'm talking to about what, I can do some research, I can build some questions, I feel prepared, they feel prepared. Like, so I think even for people who, thinking about a lot of folks who might be listening to this episode that might be like considering, entering into this space, I think it's, there's so many aspects of it that, obviously you want to feel comfortable and confident, but you can do a lot to help your guest feel comfortable and confident. That ends up just with a better end product. Everybody's just like, not feeling so kind of stiff or like reserved. And so I think that idea that people might be uh, kind of scared about like the idea of like, oh, isn't it going to feel awkward or this or that, but it's like, yeah, but I mean, like, kind of to your point, Paul, like do what you need to do to feel comfortable, and then that might even change over time. But like some people do want to do like a kickoff call beforehand to like talk through that, and like kind of get to know the person a little bit more if they don't know them. So yeah, just like that's something where it's like you figure out the path and the process that's going to feel best for you. And that's even just, yeah, the nature of like, you know, any sort of like podcast of just like what you sort of bring to it. Again, that genuine, kind of authentic personality and perspective and all that. Because like it even goes to the process, like however you want to do your process, do it, like go for it.
What would you all say? So, like, let's say someone's listening to this episode and they're like, I want to do this. Like, I want to give this a shot. What would you say are the things? Let's keep it away from the guests, because also want to ask, like, what have you learned from the guests themselves? But what did you learn from the podcasting process over time? And this might be a longer time ago for you, Dustin, than probably Crystal or I. But like, what are some of the takeaways? What do you think it's given you? Like, what are those outcomes?
I would say selfishly, it's given me a platform to ask those questions or talk about topics that feel a little bit more controversial. Or can I ask this and still have my livelihood, right? Or the questions, people want to ask, but it's like, is this a comfortable question? Is this safe? And so really leaning into being able to do that. And use this platform I've been given. And so that's one of the things that has come up. I think too, I've paid more attention to my language I don't use a lot of big fancy academic words. I say a lot, right? I don't use headphones, which you probably should. But it's really finding your style and being comfortable that everyone is going to show up in their own way. And that's something that Dustin highlighted. Like all three of us do it very differently. And so it's been cool to watch what you all do and learn. But ultimately, it's the what's the story and how do I use my platform for good to really support people who may have these questions and don't feel like they can ask them for themselves.
Yeah, and I could have a very long answer to this question, but like to be brief, yeah, definitely second the notion of like communication skills. Like I know for myself personally, I've come a long way through my whole podcasting journey, so I've been very grateful for that. Second is just like consistency is king. Like that, I take a lot of pride in that. I've just really kept consistent at the like gym of podcasting, like just getting those reps in and doing it, so that the idea of your audience as it grows, and the thing that sort of fuels the growth is that like they know every Wednesday new episode. Like doing that is like and figuring out where it's like, yeah, if I record however many episodes in a week or in a month, that gives me like this whole runway, and like I don't have to stress, and I can really bring some intentionality to like the cadence of episodes of like what's coming out when, and all those sort of things. So I think just consistency has been something that I've learned to appreciate so much over the time, and just figuring out what I need to do to achieve that. But yeah, and otherwise I think it's kind of what's been swirling around a lot with the kind of the authenticity piece is just like that sort of like imperfection is sort of acceptable, like the idea that I may get really excited and talk really fast and kind of fumble over my words or whatever, but it's like that's also just me and who I am. Or if it's just like, well, that episode like it didn't turn out how I thought it would, but like it's an episode, it's out there, and it's just another rep and kind of just another step in the journey. So I know some people have like recorded episodes for a unreleased podcast because they're just sort of like, oh, I don't know, I didn't and it's just like, all right, well, I mean, like, you like made that decision about it before you let anybody else make that, decision of like giving you feedback or whatever else. Like you did it and you never even shared it or released it, or I don't know. So those have been something like through the process has been yeah, like a great kind of insight for me, is just at least just like the value of putting the effort out there and putting in the reps and keep getting better every time.
I think for me early on, it was the differences between speaking like publicly on a stage and in front of a room and things like that versus interacting with an unpredictable guest. And I remember it so distinctly. I think it was like, I can't remember what episode number, 2, 3, 4, somewhere in there. I was interviewing DeAndre Taylor about his dissertation. And I was so focused on what question am I going to ask DeAndre next that, we were talking about DeAndre's dissertation. And so I asked him, I was like, so what are the takeaways? Like, what can professionals do? Or even I believe if I remember correctly, it was like leaders in like senior student affairs officers in housing who are Black or minority identified in some kind of way. And I was like, so what can like, white people like myself do? And I wasn't expecting him to flip the question on me and say, well, Paul, what would you do? Because I was so focused on what question am I asking him? What question am I going to ask him next? That when he flipped that on me, I was just like, and I like fumbled through it because I just so wasn't ready for it. And I think that experience made me go, okay, I need to step back. I need to calm down. This is a conversation. I need to prepare differently. I need to do these kinds of things because I don't know if he picked up on how thrown off I was, but in my head, I'm like, I wasn't expecting you to come back and ask me a question in this moment because I was thinking about what I was going to ask you after this. That I think it's gotten me more comfortable with conversational presentation style things in a way. But yeah, totally. Totally, yeah. You'll be like, oh, he's freaked out. I can tell. He's totally freaked out right there. I was so freaked out.
So I guess we can go back and listen to that episode to hear that exchange. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, that's the idea, though. Is like the idea you could go back and essentially watch play tape. Like you could go back and go like, oh my gosh, okay, yeah, I've definitely grown in the intervening months and years since I like started doing podcasting. So
Well, that's why they tell you if you've ever written a doctoral dissertation, don't read it after you've submitted it because you're going to find all the typos. You're going to just don't. Just pretend that it was perfect when you submitted it and never look back on that. That's what you should do. Well, in terms of that, have you ever had any kind of technical oopsies or hiccups, and how'd you work through them? And Dustin, we're going to limit you to like one or maybe two because I'm sure you have like, oh, you want some examples?
I will say, yeah, like the one quick one that it came very early and it was a way to like, you know, honestly probably was the worst that I've ever had is that like I recorded with somebody and like this was when I was doing it in like 2014, 2015. And so I was recording the audio off of Skype calls in sort of this like backdoor kind of, awkward way. And I recorded with somebody and the file somehow just got corrupted. So it was like we went through the entire thing, did the whole conversation, said our goodbyes, whatever. And then like probably a couple weeks later, I was like, all right, I'm getting ready, edit this to be released. It was unsalvageable. And I approached that by like kind of humbly dragging myself back over and being like, would you be willing to record again and doing, but like, obviously you're never going to capture what that episode was. And it's kind of like weird to like we knew that we were like repeating it. Nobody listening would know. And I guess I'll keep the secret if somebody wants to, maybe DM me or something, I'll say the episode, but this is for like a completely different show that's not even like active anymore. But that was something where it's the idea of like, you can do all of that prep and there can be times when you're doing a recording and the power goes out. Thankfully I've never had that, but it's that idea where like you prepared and you like did all this stuff. Yeah, you picked the right outfit, your lighting looks perfect, boom, so act of God happens and you had to like reschedule and try to start it all over again. So I think that that's like, you can try to control as many elements as you can, and I think that that is time well spent, but be kind to yourself if some sort of like thing like that happens, because it is still like completely reliant on technology and servers that could crash or power that can go out or whatever else. So that'll be the one thing that immediately comes to mind, and I think of often.
Ooh, I think that's my biggest fear. I'm like outage or something. But I was talking to one human and it was so funny. In true residence life fashion, fire alarm goes off on their end. And the lights are flashing, right? And like my brain is like, there's something happening, and I'm recording, and then they say, can we pause because the fire alarm is going off in my community? And then you just pause, and then you come back, and you have to make sense of it because I'm like, how is this going to be edited together? I have to reference this awkward pause and the fact that you're now in a different location because you had to evacuate your building. And we worked it out, you know?
I remember that. I think it worked out I mean, because we're a Res Life podcast, right? Like, what is more Res Life podcast than a fire alarm interrupting the middle of an episode? Like,
what is kind of funny though is if it was like if somebody was listening audio only, maybe they would never know. Like that's sometimes you can take comfort in certain things like that. Of like, if you're not watching this, then you wouldn't even know. Like, so maybe we don't call it out. Maybe we do. I don't know.
that's what happened. So I recorded another episode this morning. I won't say which one it is so that no one can figure it out. But um, my speaker is like an Amazon device, so it also has a voice. I don't want to say the name of the, because then it's going to trigger. But like I plug into that, so I use it as my speaker, but it's also this Amazon device that can do things. And so I was recording, and all of a sudden the ring on the device starts coloring. And so the guest is talking. I can't hear anything because apparently while it's doing this, it's completely blocking out the speaker part. So I'm just like nodding my head, completely not hearing the answer to this question that I asked. But I could see his lips moving. And I finally flipped it over to like the internal speaker in my computer so that I could hear when he ended. And so he finishes speaking, and I kind of just pause for a little bit because I know I'm going to have to like resplice things. And I'm like, I'm so sorry. I literally heard nothing you just said right now. I'm like, but it was probably great. I'm going to pretend like I did. And then when we edit it, like, I'll just splice this part out. Could you just tell me what you said? Because I couldn't hear a thing. And I'm just like, shaking my head for the benefit of the video people watching, but couldn't hear a thing. Maybe one of our podcast episodes should just be a fire alarm. We should interview a fire alarm, just let it go off for 10 minutes.
Just a white noise for people or something. We're just like, somehow I find it oddly comforting. Just the familiarity to it.
No, that sounds dramatic. Well, kind of as we reach towards the end here, I guess one piece of advice, your best piece of advice you would give for someone trying their hand at podcast hosting, starting a podcast for the very first time. What is that golden piece of advice you would impart upon them?
I will say, think of it less about you and more about the community. Like, I think, because that's, I would assume, where some people get stuck up with a lot of things that we've talked about is that, like, oh, it's putting the spotlight on me. Everybody's going to be looking at me or different things. Like, if you're being a good interviewer, you're going to be talking way less and you're just sort of segueing and guiding the conversation. So, like, think about it as like, how can I be sort of a conduit to be of service to others and, all of that. And don't think that so much of it is going to be about you. And I would say that, like, doing this show, that's been that much more apparent to me, because I think, like, I've invested so much of myself and sort of my, like, quote unquote personal brand into, like, my Higher Ed Geek podcast. But, like, this one, because we have, like, rotating hosts and, like, it feels like I am coming in so much as kind of a lay person into a lot of these sort of topics and everything. It's like, I'm trying to just be of service and certainly add my commentary where it makes sense to, but I'm learning a lot from the episodes, and I want to, kind of keep that North Star that allows me to feel comfortable taking the back seat and not, like, needing to sound like the smartest person in the episode kind of thing. That, like, okay, this is creating a piece of content that can be served up and sort of, recycled through, and kind of put in a lot of different places and all of that. But yeah, I think just think about it less about yourself and more about the community.
Again, coming from this as an introvert, it's the go with someone you know and a topic you have some familiarity with. It takes the edge off a little bit. I think it makes you a little less nervous versus that I'm just going to interview this stranger about this topic. I have no insight. I can't respond back or really engage in the topic. So I would say that's a really good way to enter into those first couple episodes is be familiar. So it just feels easier, I think.
I think one thing I've learned is it's kind of like, it's a little bit like a roller coaster, and you kind of have to lean into it. Meaning, once you click start, I mean, yes, if you mess up, you can edit that out or things like that. But once you start, you kind of are on it, right? And you might have been like, oh, I want to talk about this, and this, and this. And then you forget to talk about that. Or you're like, oh, I should have, like, delved into this more. It's kind of getting comfortable with that, once you're moving, you're all the way through to the end, and trust in yourself that you'll get things out of it, and people will be able to take things away from it, because otherwise you constantly be like, oh, can we do that again, or can we do this or that, or it become kind of messy real fast. And on that note, there was actually one other thing I wanted to ask for, which I didn't think of, was, and this is a good place, I think, to end. What is something that you've learned from a guest on this podcast? A takeaway, either about what they said or maybe how they made you think or something like that. But what has been kind of a meaningful content takeaway?
I have one. So I did one on basic needs in supporting students. And the guest talked about how there might be students who come to programs or events and they walk away with that box of pizza, or maybe they just show up and they take food and they don't stay for the content. And we get upset, right? We're like, why didn't you stay? Yada, yada. But what I appreciated the most was this person saying, our students sometimes are hungry. Let them take the food, right? Like, why are we so upset when we know there's food and housing insecurity? And it just changed my perspective on the why students may be engaging that way, and what are some things that we can do to make sure that we're supporting them in all of their needs.
I do get this question a lot when I talk to people about podcasting, and it almost is like a curse that I do a lot of podcasting and they start to blur together. So I can be like, oh, I talked to this guy for this episode, and here's what they said that like stood out, whatever. So that is, I do that to myself, which I honestly kind of uh, regret at times because it's just like, oh, I know that like it'd be so great if I could just like cite this exact moment in time with like, perfect clarity. But um, I know like, and this will sound weird, I'm sure, for a lot of the res lifers out there, but it is, I think, the idea of why, sort of spreading the good word and all that is important. I had very little familiarity with the curricular approach, like when I started doing this podcast, and appreciating it on its own merits, appreciating how applicable it is in a lot of different contexts in higher education writ large. So I think it's been a broad sort of insight into the ways that we can create intentional, thoughtful frameworks and kind of guidance and regulations, or sort of, whatever kind of word or kind of, way you want to look at this. But that idea of like moving past any notion of, tracking things or putting these sort of like, goals and outcomes on things is like restrictive. It's like, no, it helps to sort of uh, enable us to do our best work, give a clear target, and also kind of allow us to sort of show our work, show our impact, show how we're sort of benefiting students and everything. So like that's even that idea of coming in as somewhat of an outsider and being able to kind of reinvigorate my love and appreciation for this work. Uh, it is the idea of like we, you know, none of us does anything we do in sort of a vacuum, like appreciating folks being able to kind of educate me on this and be somebody who, if I'm in sort of a position to work with these folks doing this kind of work, is I can be that much more sort of an advocate and an ally and sort of a partner to it versus kind of being like skeptical of it. So I think it's just seeing what folks are doing on the ground, on campuses today. Like, yeah, I've learned a lot, and I think that's one kind of major learning that's come up through a lot of different episodes, and that like, yeah, I mean, I've just really appreciated, like, I've talked about the just widest diversity of things on this show more so than any other show. So like, that's where I think it's just like, I could give you a bunch of different little morsels and parcels, but I feel like that's been just like a really big, broader takeaway that I know is kind of a big shift that's been happening in the res life space for a while now.
My meaningfulness comes from getting to know some people that I actually have known for a long time in a different way. Getting them to talk more formally a little bit more on a topic that I know they're passionate about, or they've done so. That's been really illuminating. I think the other one that I think of is, I had to look it up. It was episode 12. Marshall University did a green move out, and they have a full-blown thrift store that students can then go buy things from, and things like that. And that episode came about because I had caught on that they had done this. Like, I think it was mentioned in my day job that they did this. And I'm like, that's great. Like, there's not a lot out there on this. Like, if you were to try to Google that, especially in a uniquely to a campus context, very specifically, I mean, good luck. Like, there's just, it's hard to find. And I was like, oh, here's like a niche that we can just highlight some people doing some cool stuff, and just give it a space where other people can discover it. And I think that episode, more so than anything, was like when I'm like, yeah, this is what I want it to be, right? Like, I'm scanning, from my perspective, I get to see a lot of different things in this field that other people may not, just because I'm coming at it from a different angle. How can I leverage that to highlight people thinking about interesting things, doing cool stuff? And that was kind of like, that was my meaningful takeaway. But, well, thanks, y'all. This has been fun. Episode 100. Here's to 100 more. For those of you that are listening, again, if you're interested in giving this a shot, look for that application. It's totally okay too if you want to experiment a little bit. Like, I want to give people some opportunities to kind of even play guest host, even if they're thinking this isn't something I want to commit to or do on a regular basis. I think that's okay too. This podcast has always been a little experimental, and I think that's a good thing. So thank you, Dustin. Thank you, Crystal. To all our listeners, thank you for sticking with us for 100 episodes, and we'll see you for episode 101.